I was seeing these mental injury claims come in, and I really got the opportunity to have a look behind why the injury occurred, what happened, what led up to it. And that's sort of where the penny dropped for me. And I'm like, these workplaces need guidance. They need to understand where they're unintentionally going wrong and unintentionally hurting people. It's the rest of the injuries that were born out of toxicity and inappropriate performance management and unsupportive leadership and high workloads and unrealistic timeframes and sexual harassment and all of these claims are just streaming in the door.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium Show. I'm delighted to be here, delighted that you're here, and delighted that my guest today is Anna Feringa. I'm super excited to speak with Anna. Anna is a mental health expert working with organizations all around Australia, really helping them create psychologically safe environments. And that's such an important aim. And welcome, Anna. Where are you today?
Oh, thanks for having me, and thanks and hello, everyone. So I'm actually very lucky today. I'm based up at Nelson Bay today, which is a beautiful little part of the world, about 2.5 hours out of Sydney. So I'm looking at a beautiful ocean and spending some time with you, Lawrence. So I feel very blessed today.
Sounds fantastic. So let's get straight into it. So for people who aren't familiar with your work, I mean, I'd love you to just take a moment just to share a little bit of your background. How did you become a mental health expert working with organizations all around Australia? It feels like a very important role, particularly now. But I'd love to understand a little bit of your story.
Yeah, sure. No problem. So it is an interesting field, and I wouldn't say a common one at this stage. It's becoming more common because the interest and need for mental health is becoming more and more abundant, or indeed I say urgent. So obviously I started off in my younger years, my good old younger years, in the world of psychology and working in personal injury. And as I was seeing all of these personal injury claims or workers' compensation claims, as it's referred to in Australia, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. And I was seeing these mental injury claims come in, and I really got the opportunity to have a look behind why the injury occurred, what happened, what led up to it. And that's sort of where the penny dropped for me. And I'm like, these workplaces need guidance. They need to understand where they're unintentionally going wrong and unintentionally hurting people. And what I mean by that is you've got I call them no-brainers, or your standard reasons why someone would become unwell in the workplace. And that can be all the yucky stuff. That can be exposure to traumatic events, emergency services frontline, witnessing or being involved in a traumatic event. And that's why it's important that people have the opportunity to be looked after. But it's the rest of the stuff. It's the rest of the injuries that were born out of toxicity and inappropriate performance management and unsupportive leadership and high workloads and unrealistic timeframes and sexual harassment and all of these claims are just streaming in the door. So I'm like, well, what are we giving employers to be able to understand how to navigate this stuff? Because if it was physical, we'd give them compliance, we'd give them a manual, they would have to adhere to certain criteria to pass as a functional and safe business or BCPU. And there's just nothing like that in the world of mental health. So that's what sort of flung me into the world of, going out and supporting employers to be able to firstly understand it and then operate safely within mental health in the workplaces. So we actually stop hurting people. But on the flip side, we actually get people working better. So it helps with higher productivity, better reputation. So it's a really, that's how I found the area. And I've got a bird's eye view of it. And I thought, right, well, these people need help. So I'm going to go out and help them. And here I am.
Amazing. Sorry, thank you for sharing that. So just picking up on this bird's eye view that you have. So given where we are in the world, I mean, we're not short of a crisis or two, and there's plenty of things actually happening. But given we've had 2 years of COVID, it seems to have dropped down the news agenda at the moment, replaced by wars and and floods and other big
things. It's item number 3 now.
Exactly. I'm conscious it's still there, but given the impact, and I don't think we probably talk a lot about this, there has been this kind of real focus on the risk of the virus, but of course, the lockdowns and all the things that we've gone through has had an impact on our mental health. And I think it's made us all aware that we all have mental health. It's not just mental ill health. I'd love to get your perspective on what mental health looks like from a workplace context today, but also what it looked like before, because we've been on this trend for a while in terms of the importance of mental health. Has been a focus. But how has it changed from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So look, Lawrence, before the pandemic even hit, Australia in particular was already in crisis. I mean, we had 21% of the industry taking time off for mental health reasons. We have 1 in 5 people at any point in time in any 1 year is suffering from a mental health problem. I won't say diagnosis because it's a long continuum. It's just a lot of people, I call it struggling or a problem or an issue. So even before the pandemic hit, and for those that are listening today, whatever role you're in, 1 in 5 people that either work for you or that you work next to is struggling today. And they were struggling before the pandemic. So it was already at crisis level. We were losing 9 people a day to suicide in Australia. A lot of those were work-related events. We also were losing around about 6 million days a year to people not at work or not working well, but yet there wasn't a lot being done to be able to help these people. And even before the pandemic, it's creeping up very closely to the leading cause of disability across Australian workplaces. Now, here's the funny thing before I launch into the COVID piece, is that if it's the leading cause of disability across Australian workplaces, the majority of clients that I engage with and help and support don't even have a policy around this stuff, but it's not their fault because they've never been taught how to write one or what it means. So it's almost like we've got this tsunami of risk coming at us, but we've got nothing to protect us. We don't even have an oar or a boat. So, and not that would be any use in a tsunami anyway, but you get my drift. Sure. And then, we blend a pandemic in with that, right? And I call it the double-edged sword with the pandemic. And that is, it took a pandemic for workplaces in particular to sit up and go, wow, people really are vulnerable. I've never seen so many people talk about mental health or recognize that they've got mental ill health in such abundance and in such frequency. So unfortunately, it took a pandemic for people to understand that mental health is a real issue, particularly in workplaces. But the unfortunate side is it had to impact so many before we actually started to sit up and go, we've got to take this stuff seriously. So the pandemic itself, for a multitude of reasons, put a lot of pressure on workplaces. It was almost immediate. So people had to pivot really quickly. So the risks floating around for workplaces were really quick performance management, change management. So people were left feeling uncertain, pulled to pillar to post. People were ripped out of offices and jammed behind screens at home, which in the first part of the pandemic became quite the novelty, but that wears off really quickly. People miss people. People miss social cues and the ability to be able to go for a physical coffee with a mate. So when the novelty wore off, people really became super isolated. Like some statistics from Beyond Blue and Black Dog and the Brain and Mind Center, they ran a really quick study between March and November of 2020, and over 50% of people reported drinking more and moving less. So that's a really important recipe to head down the lines of depression or even high-end anxiety. Over 80% are feeling uncertain about what their future looks like. So you can imagine how anxious people were. We had over 50% that felt isolated for natural reasons. And all of these people feeling this way are coming to work. So they're showing up in different ways, and leaders are getting pulled pillar to post to try and understand why people are performing differently or behaving differently. And so it caused a lot of havoc in workplaces from the top down. There was the change, there was the fear, and then there was the BAU amongst all of that. So some companies absolutely thrived, but a lot of people absolutely dived in it as well. So a couple of the confronting statistics in there is that Lifeline Australia was receiving up to 90,000 phone calls a month and continued to do so. And I'll talk about pandemic lag in a minute, but that's one call every 30 seconds. We didn't necessarily see an increase in suicidality across COVID, but what we did was we saw an increase in threats of, or an increase of suicidal ideation. And all of this is coming in and out of workplaces as well, because what I do, the pointier end of my job, Lawrence, is responding to critical incidents in workplaces. Now, I'm not a clinical psychologist, but what I do as an with a background in organizational psychology is I go in and I make sure organizations are prepared when an event occurs, and also what happens after an event. So it can go all the way from general recognition right through to critical. And in saying that, we're looking at, and the Brain and Mind Center, if anyone's interested to read more about this, have predicted that this pandemic lag is not going to end tomorrow when we sort of return to some sort of new normal. People have been through an event that in any DSM-5 revised would meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress. So we've got to be really diligent now about people's vulnerability. The Brain and Mind Center said if we don't start getting our heads around this and start to take mental health seriously, and when I say this, needs to have a safety banner on it because it is safety, it's nothing else but safety, is that those suicide rates are likely to increase between 25 and 50% in the next 5 years. And that's in and around all workplaces. So mental health took a huge toll in COVID, but now we're left with the lag. So what do people look like now when they're working part-time at home, part-time at work? Respectfully, a lot of organizations aren't doing it well. They're applying poor change management practices or mixed messaging because they're guessing themselves. And that's still causing a lot of stress on people. So I know it was a long-winded response, but I just wanted to give the audience listening today a bit of a journey as to how humans are operating from a mental health perspective before the pandemic, during it, and now we're left with this area of guessing. Is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better? Is our workplaces going to improve? And we've just got to wait and see now.
So fascinating to hear you. So really, we're deluding ourselves if we think that the pandemic caused mental health. Really, we were in crisis beforehand. And if there's any kind of positive, then what the pandemic has done is shone a light and showed us and employers that this is a problem that they need to take action and deal with. So when you look at employers, because I understand that you're often called in those kind of crisis scenarios, thinking about, because this podcast is all about finding equilibrium, it's all about finding balance, which means very much try and focus on prevention. So if there is a tsunami on the horizon, then what can we do now? Like you said, an oar is probably not going to be much good, but there are other things that we can do as an organization to prevent the tsunami that you described that could happen, which is obviously horrifying to even think about. So what are the problems and what are the solutions that employers can start to put in place now to protect the psychological well-being of their employees? Because you're right, I think one of the big impacts of the pandemic has shown us that anything can happen. So whereas possibly before that we had this false illusion that life was predictable. We kind of work hard and we get a career, and life was predictable.
Yep.
Now it's like, well, actually the old rules don't seem to apply anymore, but we haven't yet written the new rules, and that of course is creating massive stress on everybody. But what are the problems that you're seeing now? I'd love you to maybe go a little bit deeper into some of the, without obviously sharing names, but the types of problems you're seeing from the clients that you're working with,
Yep.
what they're doing, and solutions that they could start to put in place.
Absolutely. Well, I can absolutely do that. Well, what I'll do is I'll start with the fact that mental health is non-discriminatory. So every industry, whoever's listening today, whatever industry you're in, there is mental health. There are a variation in risks across industries, but it really is, and I say this respectfully as well, when I go in, there is an element of Groundhog Day for me. Everyone's got the same story. And when I say the same story, they tell me, whether it's a bank or mining and construction or oil and gas or non-for-profits or public health or private health, they've got the same stories. And what those problems look like is our people aren't getting along. Our people aren't coming to work. Our people are at work, but they're not working well. Our HR channels are logged back to 1972. We've got, a lot of HR complaints coming in. Our workers' compensation claims are increasing. People are leaving. People are arguing. So you can see that, if I was to put that in a nutshell, they're dealing with toxic environments because people are stressed and they're not shown the way on how to manage that stress or respond. So if I'm a leader, I haven't been taught what a safe, evidence-based and effective way is to be able to respond to that staff member, to keep them safe and to make sure that they get the treatment that they need. So we've got a lot of stuff happening. You've got your reputation as an organization. You don't treat someone fairly in an organization, that's going to get around, and that's going to impact the quality of candidates that you receive in the future. People aren't chasing the pay packet anymore. Sure, it's important, but particularly as millennials come into the fold, they're looking for safe and fruitful workplaces. So this is the birth of a huge thing. And there's a lot of risk going on. And to summarize all of that, the absenteeism, the presenteeism, the cost, the reputation and the injury, we are essentially hurting people. And, from a moral and ethical standpoint, we need to stop hurting people, but we also need to know how to do that. A lot of people say mental health is subjective. How am I supposed to know if someone's feeling sad? I mean, someone's pretty much got to be in a corner crying their eyes out or getting into a fist fight before we need to intervene and go, okay, this person's not traveling too well. So it's really important that workplaces understand that there is a dual approach to resolving, or at least starting to help reduce some of these nasties. And that is firstly understanding what a psychologically healthy environment looks like, but also what psychosocial risks look like. And I see those terms being used interchangeably because everyone's talking about mental health at the moment. And I just want to clear that up. A psychologically safe workplace is a workplace where people feel comfortable to speak up. They've got education in the building. They've got engaged executives. It's driven from the top down. There's a human and evidence-based system to be able to approach and navigate mental health. So basically, think about it like physical safety. If I get a headache, a bad back, or break my leg, people are going to understand. They're going to jump in and help, and they're going to help me recover. Obviously, workplace is only one cog in a wheel. It takes a village, family, friends, community, and professionals. But mental health isn't there yet. Mental health is, in fact, about 15 to 20 years behind how companies understand safety. So in order to prevent that, that psychological culture is important. So I want all our listeners today to think, if I was to become mentally unwell tomorrow, how would my company respond to that? Would I be fearful that I'm going to lose my job? Would I be fearful that my capability is going to be questioned? Would I be fearful that I'm going to be judged negatively by my mates and my boss? Because if that's how you automatically feel right now as you're listening in, then you're not in a psychologically safe environment. And so it's cultural. And then we've got psychosocial. So people like to use those terms interchangeably, but I'm going to clean that up today. There's psychosocial risks, which can harm someone in a workplace. And that means anything like bullying and harassment and inappropriate workloads. And there's, in fact, in New South Wales, Australia, I'm really excited to say that they've released psychological codes of practice or psychosocial codes of practice. They've been active since May 2021. Now, I was a little bit annoyed because the New South Wales government weren't courageous enough to make it regulation yet. They've still called it a code. But what that is what we're starting to see is some support and some clarity for organisations to understand what does risk look like and how do we address it. Whereas before pandemic, everyone was kind of left to guess. We had airy-fairy WHS guidelines or work health safety guidelines, a bunch of stuff with Fair Work Australia, a bunch of stuff with Safe Work Australia, a bunch of stuff with human rights, and a bunch of stuff with discrimination. Whereas you can see why organisations would become confused because it's a bit there and a bit there and a bit there, where these codes of practice are something that are digestible, they're human, it makes things clear. And all the other states in Australia are imminent to release theirs. WA went live in February. So if we've got our Western Australian listeners, just Google it. Psychosocial codes of practice, it'll come up for you. It'll let you know what mental health or psychosocial risks look like and how to manage them. Victoria, Dan Andrews has taken it a step further and they're actually starting to chip away at changing their legislation as well as putting codes of practice on the table. So I can't really make comment about Tas, NT, SA or Queensland as yet, but they've all sat down and agreed to do this for Safe Work Australia. So they're imminent. I just don't have a date for you. So what we're seeing now is codes, but the codes aside, what keeps me busy and what I do in conjunction with the very exciting changing regulatory environment is I go in and I help organizations establish a relative system that is going to become part of the DNA. It's not just a day out training. That doesn't fix anything. Sure, training's involved, but that doesn't fix anything. So the ticker box approach is not going to create a safe environment. You need to be able to plan from a board and executive level. It needs to become a key priority. And then we need to have a look at the organization's commitment. So that looks like what our policies and procedures look like, because over 90% of workers around Australia don't even have a mental health policy. They might have a throwaway one-liner in a safety policy saying we care about mental health, but show us how. How does that work? So policies and procedures are really important. And then we've got to bring capability into the building. We've got to give leaders the skills to be able to identify, monitor and respond to people that are declining in their mental health. What does that look like? And how can I safely intervene as a leader and not step into the world of accidental counselling? Because that's another thing, right? People are left to guess. We're all kind-hearted, balanced people on a day-to-day basis sometimes. So we do our best to help, but that isn't always the right way to help. So it's about commitment. It's about direction. It's about capability, but also ongoing measurement. Is this effective? How effective is this for your people? You can do a mental health first aid training session. I'm a facilitator in it. That isn't going to save you. We need to be able to bring full capability and bring it up to the level that physical safety is spoken about and addressed before it becomes effective. And that's how I support organizations to get there.
Interesting. Just picking up, thank you very much for sharing that with us. Incredibly helpful. On the measurement piece, so when you talk about measurement, I think back to my days working in corporate, managing big teams, and it was something I would worry about a lot because I guess of the person I was. So we did a lot of surveys, engagement surveys, and the whole organization would take those results very seriously and try and put different initiatives in place on an ongoing basis. Because what I learned is sometimes like you said before, if people are crying in the corner, then it's pretty obvious that they're distressed. But often you don't know. You don't know, because I was running remote teams. So we were in different offices, a bit like the problem we have now. I couldn't physically see people. And even if you could, often people were hiding their true feelings. What are the right measurements or the metrics to help managers and leaders feel that the risk is being managed, if you like, to understand whether a tsunami is coming or whether it's plain sailing ahead? Like, how can we, because I'm also very sensitive to the needs, the psychological needs of managers and leaders, and often, and we hear this a lot through our wellbeing at work summits, is that it's why we have such a big emphasis on leaders, because we know that the leader has a huge impact on the mental health of an organization, sets a tone, sets a culture, and all of those things. Mm-hmm. Likewise, if a leader is not in a good place himself, not in equilibrium, as I would say, then of course that will ripple through the organization as well. So, a couple of points there, but really I'm keen to understand from your perspective what the right measures are to create a preventative culture to keep things in balance. Yeah,
of course. So there's a couple of ways. So let's talk about the technical way first. And this is relatively new as well. So this is would be appropriate for those that are listening in from Australia today, is that, that there is now something called a People at Work survey. So that is the only clinically endorsed and validated psychometric assessment. And here's the really exciting piece. It's free. Wow. So organizations can just log on to People at Work. So that's people with your @ sign work, and you'll get, you'll just make a log on, and you can actually disseminate that out to your workplace. They can fill it out on their phones and their tablets, and it's really user friendly. It's not long winded, because, even saying the word survey gives me anxiety sometimes. I'm like, another survey, right? But this is built in and around psychosocial risk. So I'm really excited to see that be launched. It's endorsed by Fair Work Australia, Safe Work Australia, all of the regulators. So when I say regulators, personal injury regulators, for example, say WorkSafe Victoria or Return to Work SA. So there's a lot of providers out there that will do psychometric or risk analysis or gap analysis, and I'm not trying to put them down, but it's a very expensive process. And what I like to chase is validity. So that's why I always sort of push everyone in the direction of the People at Work survey, because why pay for it and feel confident that you're using a validated tool. And what that does is that captures where your organization is as far as level of risk, and it spits out a nice report, and then the companies can go and run with that. So that's one technical way that organizations can maybe kick the process off, depending on where they are as far as their level of balance or equilibrium with mental health management. And I can guarantee a lot of people listening today wouldn't be in that space, because it's still quite a new concept. And even, like I said, the government's even playing catch up with how to support people in this space. Now let's take it away from technical, and let's go to human measurement. Leaders, and I completely agree with you, do guide and determine the culture of their team. There's some research, I'm sure that you're aware of the research too, Lawrence, under the Gallup Institute, that whatever a leader does and however they behave and however they portray themselves in workplaces, people around them or their staff are likely to mirror or emulate that back 70%. So leaders are really important to be able to drive that psychologically safe workplace. But the problem is we're not giving them the skills, the guidance, or the permission to be able to do it. So in the early stages, let's say people that are listening today haven't brought that capability piece into their organization yet. And that's where training clips on, like Lego, to be able to understand what the right and wrong way is to address something. Is we've become so busy, particularly as leaders, and we're under a lot of pressure, is that we forget real conversations. And I'm not saying just go and have a mental health conversation, because a lot of people don't have the skills to do it, but just ask the question, maybe in your next team meeting, maybe in your next one-on-ones. A lot of leaders that I'm working with at the moment can't remember when their last one-on-one was. So no wonder we're not across cues or signs that people are struggling. whether we're talking through a screen or whether we're in person, we can still talk about mental health and just say, look, it's really important. We've just been through an interesting 2 years. As a leader, I want to know how everyone's mental health is. You don't have to talk about it, but I want to hear about it. So that's a good way for leaders to start measuring from a human from a human-centric perspective, how to start getting across what problems are. We're just not talking to each other. People are actually even scared to say mental health, but and it's clinically recommended that we can't be grey or fuzzy around the area. We have to call it out for what it is. And so I don't want anyone to fall down a flight of stairs, but I also don't want you to become so stressed that you can no longer work or work well. They're both safety. So it's a really good opportunity for leaders to start doing that human-centered measurement by prioritizing your one-on-ones, getting mental health on your next team agenda. There's different ways, but we would be on here for 3 hours, Lawrence. There's different ways that you can pose questions to make people reach that level of comfort. But primarily, people aren't going to want to talk about their mental health in front of a crowd.
No.
And when I hear one-on-one meetings that are falling off because we're too busy, that's where risk is growing, because you might be a fantastic person and a fantastic leader, but if you're not giving your people 15 minutes, once a week or once a fortnight or once a month, whatever it looks like for leaders listening today, how could you possibly gauge what risk you're facing? And that's why a lot of leaders are caught off guard. Mate, I didn't know you were so unwell. I apologize. I just didn't know. So absolutely. One-on-ones, team meetings, and from a grander scale, get your people at work survey done for the listeners today. See what risk you're facing. You won't know unless you start to poke around a bit.
That's incredibly helpful. And I guess even on the one-to-ones, even just this point you were saying about connection, because you can measure that, if you're connecting and having one-to-ones with your team every couple of weeks, at least that's giving you some insight to help people move forward and feel that the organization actually cares about them, or the managers actually care about them as a person. All right, we're almost out of time. So last question, which I ask everybody, given this podcast is called Finding Equilibrium, I'd love to know what finding equilibrium means to you. There's no right or wrong answer. And then I'd also love, given the work that you do, and in many ways you're seeing lots of problems, and it must be incredibly exhausting for you, this kind of Groundhog Day, because it's like and you're there, and it's wonderful and such valuable work, and you're such a sunny character I've never
been called sunny before. I like it.
Hugely sunny character. So the second part of the question is, what do you do personally to keep in equilibrium, to enable you to be in that center so that you can do the work that you do?
Absolutely. So first things first, I see a psychologist. That's my personal choice. I'm not saying everyone needs to do that, but I work with people and hear a lot of personal stuff. So I'm open. I call it mind maintenance, because I've got to take it out of my mind and put it elsewhere in order to prevent me potentially experiencing mental ill health or high anxiety or depression. I also make sure I stay incredibly connected. I'm a very social person, so I draw my energy from people. But I'm also aware that I'm a very people-orientated person, that I need my switch-off days. So, I do literally just go rogue for 2 days a month, and just phones go off, computers go off. My mother goes crazy. I can't get you on the phone. I thought you were injured. I'm like, I'm just not prepared to talk to anyone today. So being self-aware of when your wick is burning. I love my running. I'm not consistent with it. So again, I'm very honest. I'm not consistent with it, but when I do it, it works well for me. But just being able to switch off when I know I've had enough, just knowing that it's okay to say no. And that's certainly something that the pandemic has taught me as well, is you don't have to be everywhere all the time to be a validated human, and the importance of rest. And then I guess, I'm lucky to be, from a mental health perspective, balanced, because I'm lucky enough to have the education to know when things are out of character or heading down that poor health avenue. So yeah, my running, my social connections, my ability and permission to switch off keeps me very balanced. and also my psychologist that I, chime into every couple of months just to unload and put all the stuff that, all these beautiful people have told me they're experiencing, and sock it away somewhere else so I'm no longer carrying it. And that's how I stay relatively balanced and sunny.
No, that's wonderful. And just kind of underline that point about making sure you have that professional support, because it does make a huge difference to
wouldn't be sunny without
her. That's wonderful. And what does find an equilibrium mean to you as a phrase?
What does it mean to me? Well, it actually, what the first word that comes to my mind, listen to me, equilibrium means peace. That's the first word that pops into my mind. It means being in a relative state of peace and health. And it also, that means I can get my day done to the best of my ability, and not be burnt out or a different person or inappropriate to people. It's that inner peace. That's where I feel equal, and that's not permanent. That's not a permanent state of play. I get very unequal a lot of the time, but I'm aware when that happens. So I think for our listeners too, if they're listening and thinking, what does equilibrium mean for them? Are you self-aware to know what that even means for you? That's a great place to start.
I love that, Anna. Thank you so much. I'd love to acknowledge you for the amazing work that you do and have done and continue to do and will continue to do. It's so wonderful listening to your experience. As troubling as it can be, there are solutions. I think that's a key thing that I'd leave people. That I think the starting point, as you say, is really understanding what your starting point is as an organization, and then you can decide what to do next. Where can people find out more about you and get in touch and follow your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can find me a couple of ways. So you can just jump on and just type Anna Feringa into LinkedIn and you'll find me. You can also just type annaferinga.com.au into Google and jump onto my website, www.annaferinga.com.au. So LinkedIn, websites is pretty much the easier way that people can do it, other than me flinging out my mobile phone number, which I'm not prepared to do today because today is my equilibrium day and phone's going off. So yeah, website and LinkedIn would be the easiest way. Just punch in my name and I'll pop up, and the LinkedIn will help a lot of people. There's a lot of thought bubbles and things on there that can give organizations and particularly leaders tips on, what does it look like day to day to tackle this mental health stuff in the workplace?
Amazing. Well, thank you, Anna. Enjoy your equilibrium day. And thank you for taking a little bit of time out of it to speak with us today. Really appreciate that. And thank you, everybody. And we will see you next time.